Hi, I'm Matt Johnston, firefighter and mental health clinician. Today I'd like to share with you my conversation with Dr. Peter Levine. Dr. Levine is the founder of Somatic Experiencing Therapy, a brand of therapy that has changed the mental health landscape for therapists and the people they serve. He is also a New York Times best-selling author, and it's my privilege to bring my conversation with him to you today.
Well, when I first started developing the work almost 50 years ago, I was, in some way, I was lucky. Well, I was lucky because the definition of trauma as PTSD wasn't yet in the lexicon as PTSD, that would be another 12 years before that definition.
Wow.
And so I didn't know that trauma was supposedly a brain disorder, a brain disease that that person would be having for the rest of their lives, and that the best you could do would manage it with medication, with drugs, or trying to change one's negative thoughts. And I mean that's important. That's important. But really, what was missing, that until the experience in our bodies changed, we would still be experiencing the trauma. So that had to change. And the new sensations had to contradict those of overwhelming helplessness, fear and overwhelming helplessness. So we had to have new experiences in our bodies, more powerful and more settled, but bodily experiences. And so that, in a way, it's not quite the right term, but it like neutralizes the trauma, some way of mobilizing the body in a safe context, so that then we could really socially engage. And one of the things, with this recent epidemic, and of course this is profoundly affecting so many of the first responders, especially medical responders, but all the first responders, is that this is a situation where, well, we're not prepared for this. Our bodies and our brains are they're designed by evolution to localize sources of threat, and then to respond to that threat, usually by fighting or fleeing, fight or flight response. But with something like this, where you can't see it, you don't know where it is. It could be lurking anywhere. It could be on the letter you get from your mailbox. It could be, from the person in the store, from the people who aren't wearing masks, at the beach. And so because we're unable to localize it, it overwhelms us. And again, I think that's something that's happening to the first responders, because they are working in very difficult conditions. They're working sometimes with not even the right equipment. They're working where they could become infected, and they're there day in and day out, day in and day out. And that, of course, has an effect. Everybody has a breaking point. Everybody. I don't care, if it's the housewife from Topeka, Kansas, or if it's the Green Beret, or the Navy SEALs. We accumulate this stress, and if we don't have some way to discharge the stress, to kind of move it through our bodies, because it gets stuck in our bodies. That's what happens. Right. That's what happens to stress. It gets locked in our bodies. So our shoulders contract in fear, our guts twist and tighten, and so we carry that with us. And because we're carrying that with us, it seems like that threat is absolutely imminent.
So let me share with you just a personal experience I have. Is in every fire hall I work in, there's this HP printer that activates. It's called a rip and run. It gives us information on the call that we'll be going to. And it precedes the tones in the fire hall. So you had kind of mentioned classical conditioning and unconditioned stimulus. Now in my everyday life, whenever a printer activates, alerts me back into a fire hall setting. And that's a very obvious one, but
Hmm.
there's all sorts of subtle ones that I may not even notice that
That's right.
have an impact probably on my physiology on a deeper level, but largely unconscious. Um,
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why it's so important to become more and more conscious of our bodies,
Yes.
because that's again where we're holding that tension and surprise. So if your shoulders are like this and you hear the printer, your shoulders go up even more
Yeah.
and you're ready for action. But let's just say you notice your shoulders coming up and then you let them come down. Again, you do it again, gently lifting the shoulders up towards the ears, gently a little bit more, and then letting it go. And then maybe this time when you hear the printer, you think, oh, somebody must be sending me a fax.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, oh, I think maybe somebody's printing something out.
Yeah. What
But when
about,
you're like this, you're going to assume that the threat is imminent.
yeah, absolutely. So basically being able to kind of stimulate that frontal cortex to retrain it that this is not a threat. Is that kind of where you're going with this
Yes, exactly.
observation?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's not a threat
Right.
because again, when there is threat, we want to be prepared. That's for survival. But again, with this mysterious, you know, uh, unseen virus, there's no way we can't localize it. We can't.
Yeah.
But our bodies need to respond. So again, doing some of those physical exercises lets the body respond. So before the body, the tension is all dressed up, but with nowhere to go.
Mm.
But then when you feel the tension and can move with the tension, then it changes.
Yeah, it reminds me of, before a professional hockey game. Of course, I'm Canadian, so I'll use that as an example. Um,
Either that or curling.
sure, yeah, but I'm from the West Coast, so curling is more of a prairie thing. But
Right, right.
now all of a sudden, my curler friends in Vancouver are gonna disagree with me there. But long story short is when you notice national anthems being played before a professional sporting event, the hockey players are shifting back and forth.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering what your perspective is on that, because obviously they're in an anticipatory mindset,
Yes.
and it's, I'm sure, quite anxiety provoking with
Yeah.
18,000 people.
Right.
And
Sure. But again, I think they're also gearing up.
mhm.
I think that's a good use of the anthem.
Yeah,
Because because it's like again, you want to be that excited. You want to be ready, vigilant, ready. But it's not going to do you any good if you're overloaded.
yeah. I really like the way you distinguish between hypervigilance and vigilance.
Yes.
I think that's a really key spectrum that first responders would, when you think about psychoeducation, would be really important to teach the
Yeah.
difference between the two.
Yes. When a man or woman has learned within his heart or her heart what fear and trembling mean, they are safeguarded against any terror produced by outside influences. And those are outside influences, and they're profoundly disturbing outside influences. And again, Michael was introducing the talk. It's like you can't localize the source of threat, as in fight or flight. So in the military, there's somebody firing at you, or even that person comes out and has a cell phone in their hand. That could be life threat. So you respond in a way that you've been trained to respond, right? But again, if you don't know where this enemy is coming from, if it could be anywhere, and that's why things like germ warfare or those kind of things are so frightening to people
Mhm.
and so frightening to first responders because you can't locate it.
Right.
Yeah. So let me just show you a couple of things that I think would be more appropriate because again, first responders are active people.
Yeah.
They're action people. They're doing people.
Are
I
you,
mean, I'm sure you kind of had the reverse thing of going, from being a therapist to then, coming to be a first responder, which is an interesting transition.
It is, yeah.
Often, when it does occur, it's usually in the opposite direction.
That's right. Yeah.
First responders say, "God, we've got to really, get some of these tools for our, for our brothers and sisters."
Yeah.
So let me just show you a couple of things that you can do, and again, like we did it in groups when we were responding to the Southeast Asian tsunami. We met with this one of our people who was a Qigong teacher, but you don't have to use any formal Qigong kinds of things. Let me just show you some of the things you can do.
Okay.
So, and just wait, just rest, just notice sensations, feelings, thoughts, anything that's going on in our bodies and in our minds. The thing about fear is that it's a very physical thing. It's not just something that happens in our brains and our mind, but it's something that really happens in our bodies. So, for example, when, after a stressful day, if we're aware of it, if we notice our shoulders are coming up to our ears. So again, what the shoulders are doing is telling the brain, hey, guess what? The threat is still going on, because that's how I'm responding. That's the way the body and the brain and nervous system work, how they cooperate with each other or discooperate with each other. So one, again, simple exercise, it's just have the person feel the tension in their shoulders. It could be anywhere in their bodies, but say it's in the shoulders, and just slowly just imagining that tension increasing. So the shoulder, it goes up a little bit, and then gently let the shoulder come down. Great. And again, gently lifting the shoulders a little bit, and then letting the shoulders come down. That's it. Good. And just noticing any sensations, feelings, thoughts, pictures that come into your mind. What you want to just say a little bit what you noticed?
Definitely a tight, probably just nervousness is speaking to you, and sitting here making sure the internet connection and lighting's good.
Exactly. So those are the stresses. And again, when these things, the shoulders start staying up there. I remember I worked in the former Yugoslavia right at the end of the war. And I would see this scene several times. So these old women would be crossing the street, and there'd be an explosion, and their shoulders would go up and they'd run back to the sidewalk. And then they would go across again, and again there was another bomb or a gun firing, and again their shoulders went up. After the third time, the shoulders went up and they stayed up. And so they were again now being paralyzed by the fear. It then becomes part of, they don't need the unconditioned stimulus, the gunfire anymore, or the explosion. Their bodies are staying in that position.
Hypervigilance then?
Yes, exactly. When your shoulders like that, you are hypervigilant. You are looking. And again, especially for first responders, a certain degree of heightened vigilance is essential.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even bordering on hypervigilance, but not quite. Because when you go to hypervigilance, again, you're not being selective.
Right. You're just in alarm mode. And
exactly. You're just, yeah. So again, we don't want to get rid of that, but at the same time, we don't want that to be the default mode.
One of the things that I kind of noticed in contemporary firefighter culture and first responders in general is this idea that we're wearing a backpack, and rocks get put in that backpack, and what we're really referring to is cumulative traumatic experiences to some degree.
Right. Yep.
And and the idea that over time your backpack gets pretty heavy and weighs you down. And really talking about to first responders on the West Coast is the idea of upstream mental health care, like recognizing the weight of your backpack prior to
Mm,
that emergence of I feel off and I don't know why. And my assumption is, because I don't really practice therapy too much anymore, but the idea that trauma is getting trapped and accumulating in your limbic system and can only kind of whisper to your frontal cortex. And so when that backpack overflows or tears and the boulders fall out, we just completely feel overwhelmed. And that's
that's
typically
right.
when we enter therapy and
Mm,
think that in 50 minutes a therapist can fix us.
right, right. Well, thinking along those lines, you know, um, talking about the military again, they're trained how to deal with heat stress if they're deployed in the desert area, and that's life saving.
Mhm.
So they develop a little bit about the physiology and about what to do and about what not to do, and that's life saving. I would hope that they could do the same for the stress,
Absolutely.
the accumulated stress